Welcome everyone to our third session on grief and the holidays. Joining me today is David Stevenson. He's our bereavement coordinator from our office in Philadelphia. And David brings vast experience to our conversation and was also a previous active duty Army chaplain. Welcome back, David.
It's good to be with you, Greg, and all of our listeners who will pop on.
I look forward to the conversation. So David, over the past couple episodes, we've chatted about the huge impact grief has had on the holidays and for those grieving, and especially with the added challenge of this pandemic. We find ourselves really looking for the answers maybe. And last week we bounced around some ideas on how we can remember or honor our loved ones, and we've covered a lot of ground. As a professional in the grief and bereavement space, what do you think is the best advice or guidance we can give those who find themselves really struggling with grief over this holiday season?
Yeah, Greg, I mean, every day as a bereavement coordinator, I have conversations with people who have recently lost a loved one. And we follow up with families for a year or more following the death of their loved one, just to check in with them to make sure that they're doing okay, that things are being addressed. And it's always, as we get closer and closer to the holiday time, many folks, and we had a listener at our last segment who shared that she had lost both of her parents around the holiday time, and how she dreads the holidays every year since then. And I could totally hear that, and I understand that. But I never want people to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, because there's so much value with the holidays and connecting with the loved ones whom we've lost. And so my number one piece of advice, if I were to capsule in one little segment, would be to go easy on yourself over the holidays. People put a lot of pressure on themselves to make the holidays look like a certain thing. It's they have a certain standard of how they want the holiday time to look. And now, with having lost a loved one or multiple loved ones, to keep that pressure going to have the perfect holiday could be exhausting. And as many of our listeners know who are in the midst of grieving takes an emotional, a lot of energy. To grieve. It pulls a lot of energy from us. So to be able to manage our grief and to juggle all the holiday responsibilities can be an enormous task. So I always say to folks, this is a time for you to go easy on yourself. We talk a lot about the waves of grief, and people experiencing those waves. Some of them come at very unpredictable moments where they're walking through the grocery store, or they're driving, and all of a sudden they feel this wave come over them, and they maybe tear up or they cry as they're reflecting on their loved one. But the holidays it's a wave that we anticipate, right? We see it coming. We see that holiday period coming. So I think it does us well as grievers to prepare ourselves for that wave, knowing that it's going to come, starting at the end of, or actually middle of November until January. We're going to be in the throes of the holiday season, and we're going to feel our grief up to our throat. Remember, a couple weeks ago, I shared about the grief spiral, and how when we are triggered in our grief, we're often here in our baseline, but as we're triggered, we climb up the grief spiral. Well, the holiday time could be always up here, where our grief is so much at our throat that it's hard for us to enjoy life and to do the things that we need to do to keep things going. So So when I see the holiday period come and I talk to our bereaved, and I hear them um, just wanting to just fast forward the time to January, I want to be able to sit with them and encourage them to try to use these holidays as a way to connect with their loved one. And but first and foremost is to really exercise self-care and to be easy on yourself.
Yeah, not let it get maybe, I think a lot of us are pretty organized and structured, right? And they're expecting it to come maybe in waves. And I think maybe the spiral offers a nice symbolism of how things can just ebb and flow and rise and fall. And it seems like you're encouraging people to let that happen a little bit.
Sure. We often say that, Greg, and I know we mentioned it last time that we never want to push our grief away. We never want to run from it. We want to lean into it. And we want to allow those emotions to ebb and flow. We want to put ourselves in a safe place, having safe people in our lives whom we can share those emotions with, and they're not going to judge us, they're not going to criticize us, but they're going to allow us just to be sad, might be anxious, depressed, what have you. And so having that safe place with safe people over the holidays is paramount.
Yeah.
So
excellent. It seems, and I know I have my friends, some of them are perfectionists, and they're looking for maybe just like a very neat, and they have all these preconceived notions of their holiday traditions and memories, and they try and make sure that they all happen the right way. And it sounds like you're giving them permission to just really give yourself a break a little bit and be open to what may come, and you don't control it.
Right. And so when we talk about the holidays and we talk about maybe having a standard of perfection, we want to be able to meet with our family members and try to encourage one another to even amidst the imperfection, even amidst the sadness, that we can take maybe some traditions that are that have always been part of our holidays and tweak them some, where they could still be part of our holiday tradition, but be maybe extra comforting in our grief, by allowing some connection with our loved one amidst those tried and true traditions that we have. The pandemic just makes everything all the more challenging. In some ways, I feel like we're speaking the way that we're talking. It's like we're talking as if we're able to get together and do the things that we would normally do over the holiday time. Right? We know darn well that there are people who are listening to us who are not only grieving the loss of a loved one, but they're also grieving the loss that they're not going to be able to have Christmas dinner with their family members. They're grieving the loss of people coming over and looking at their tree and handing out and giving Christmas cookies out to everybody. And all those simple traditions that we're having to, in a sense, lose right during this pandemic is hard on people in and of itself, let alone bringing in the loss of a loved one.
Yeah. Challenging and difficult, especially during this pandemic. I think it's wearing on so many of us. We have a listener offering that sometimes just sharing the memories, instead of maybe thinking about the traditions, but some of the memories and maybe the joy spots of where they feel joyous. And she offered that sometimes even February is hard because now the holidays are over and there's still stuff to unpack there.
Sure. I appreciate what that listener says, because I think what he or she is saying is that this is that they want to use the holidays as a time to really connect with their loved one whom they lost. And the holidays could be I know for me, I think I shared last time we met that one of my things my mom did was that she made pizzelles. So we make pizzelles over the holidays as a way of connecting with her. And I know people do that. They like to connect with their loved one through some traditions. And then when February comes, you're let down because, the holidays maybe were a real time of connecting with them. And now we have to move forward. which is difficult.
Yeah, yeah. I loved your little box example of where you put notes in there, and maybe you use that before the holidays to connect with things you want to talk about, maybe with friends or family or over Zoom or on video chat. There's so much technology out there these days. And maybe keeping those for next year, maybe in February and March, you could offer and just, keep putting ideas in there. Kind of connects to, we had a listener in our first session recommend the journaling piece is just for some writing, maybe a nice way to, stay connected to some of those memories. And again, maybe just all sorts of emotions that come with that as well.
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, the holidays, again, could be a real wonderful time of connecting. And I think with Zoom and with virtual things, we can maybe do some activities where you write down you share a memory or write down a memory, maybe stick it in a box or send them into a family member and they can keep them all together. And then those stories, those memories could be shared over Thanksgiving dinner or at Christmas time or Hanukkah, whatever time of celebration the family has to be together and just to share those stories and those memories.
Yeah, yeah. David, another tip comes to mind that I remember you sharing in our discussions. Sometimes over the holidays, you may not be feeling right or just struggling, and you have to give yourself permission to say no. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, again, put pressure on themselves to kind of keep up with things. And I think I shared the story with you. I had a woman in one of my grief support groups that was actually over the holiday time, and she was receiving a lot of pressure from family to put up a beautiful Christmas tree because that was her husband. He really loved the tree, and it was all about how beautiful the tree looked. And she just did not want to do that this year. She just was feeling emotionally drained. And, so the group members supported her in maybe sharing with her family that though this year may not be the year to put a full blown Christmas tree up, we're going to just pull some of Dad's favorite ornaments and maybe place them on the mantle of the fireplace to just sort of compromise, because putting the whole tree up was just too much. So in a sense, she had to say no, and she had to set some boundaries in order to make sure that she was taking care of herself. I mean, I tell this to people all the time, as we for those of us that like to travel and fly, and we hear the instructions the flight attendants give as far as the oxygen mask coming down and how you have to make sure you put it on yourself before you start placing it on people around you who may be in need. And that's the same thing with taking care of ourselves over the holiday time. We need to make that a priority, that self-care. And I want to get into that a little more, but self-care needs to be the priority over the holiday time, especially because it could be draining. And if they want to make the holiday special for family members, they need to first make sure they're taking care of themselves.
Yeah. Self-care is so important. I know that the saying no piece is hard, but allowing, I think, to just our busy lives and, pre-COVID, during COVID, how hard it is to, you always kind of have a schedule or to-do list. And some days, is it okay to not have that to-do list and certain things I have to check off because it seems so formal? What would you offer there, David?
Well, again, I would just remind that person the emotional energy that grieving takes, and that they're not going to be able to keep at their regular pace right now, especially with the holiday time. And so I would again encourage them to really be easy on themselves, to set up those boundaries around, to make sure that they're expressing their emotions in a way where people are hearing them and supporting them in those sharings of emotions and memories, and that they would just have to say that they can't get everything done that they would normally get done, and that's okay. It's not that they're less of a person or they're not keeping up with things, but this is just the way that this year has to be. And having those people in your life who are who are going to support you with that.
Yeah. It's funny. I think back to my family and how we dealt with grief. Sometimes I found my family members finding it easier to connect with a stranger. And I know we have a couple listeners who've offered that sometimes it's just a random conversation. It was a walk in the park, or they were at the store, and you know, my uncle was having a hard time and he just broke down, and this total stranger came up to him and just put an arm on his shoulder and says, "You okay?" And he said they had a great 10-minute talk, and he said, "I felt amazing afterwards," but he felt awkward because it was a total stranger.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't know if that's something you've had people you've worked with, is that okay? Or it seems like it's just completely random. It just happens.
Yeah, I think, I mean, to me, when I hear that story, it makes me think that, that people, we're not created to be sad and to be actively grieving 24/7. We need to take breaks from that, and sometimes doing an activity with in the community, or doing some sort of charity event, or allowing just random conversations with strangers can be a great distraction amidst all the heartache that we're currently experiencing, maybe during this holiday season.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. I was talking to another professional in our office who works with groups, and they were talking about having a little bit of structure. And, the one was, there was a puzzle that they had worked on as a family. That was kind of the after Thanksgiving, after the gifts were opened, or after your holiday celebration, they would do a puzzle. They'd go for a walk, and they were struggling with finding the joy. They felt a little guilt there. I would imagine some people struggle with that as well.
Sure, and I think that structure is important, and I think that's a big element in self-care. When I think of self-care, I think of having those things placed throughout your day that brings some structure and that really kind of feed the soul and feed the body. So it might be doing a puzzle that's completely unrelated to grief and loss. It might be making sure you're getting your nails done and that you're doing the things that make you feel good. Maybe you like to go get a massage or something. I think during the holiday time is a good time to increase those activities of structure, those activities of feeding the soul and feeding the body. I think this is a good time for us to do more of that as a griever over the holiday period.
Yeah. If it's funny you bring up food. It's important to me in the holiday session. I'm sure it's important to others as well. If someone maybe feels like there's something wrong with them, loss of appetite, upset stomach, maybe some of the physical stuff that is masking pain or something like that. What would you offer to our listeners if they were struggling with something along those lines?
Well, I guess I would first, try to maybe chat with them to help them to see that those physiological symptoms could very well be connected with their grief, and because it kind of shows itself in some of those struggles with sleep and with eating, digestive issues or whatnot. I would encourage them to bring their physician in on the conversation, to chat with their doctor about what they're experiencing. As we have shared a couple times over these broadcasts, if they were to call into one of our Crossroads offices and talk with a bereavement coordinator, they would be able to connect them either with some one-on-one support, which we provide, but also we have resources of therapists and counselors that they could talk more deeply maybe about what's going on inside, because often what's going on inside reveals itself on what's going on the outside.
Excellent. Yeah. Just so hard sometimes, it seems complex, and maybe keeping it simple. A couple of our listeners have mentioned for them it was just simple, made life easier, and take it day by day. There was a website, David, you had mentioned in one of our conversations. I know you wanted to talk about. Do you want to dive into that a little deeper?
Well, I think if those that are listening now and will listen to this broadcast, an excellent website on grief and loss, which is, to me, it's for, I call myself us lay people, even though I'm a professional in grief and bereavement. It's just an excellent website. It's called What's Your Grief. I think it's www.whatsyourgrief.com. And they just have loads of articles, resources. They have some courses that you can take as a griever. It's just chock full of just information. And even on this very topic of self-care, they give a lot of pointers, many of that we've already shared, as far as making sure that you're taking care of yourself over the holiday period. And then they have some resources on virtual ways of remembering our loved one over the holidays, as getting together is not part of our picture this during this particular season. So how are we going to connect with our loved one over the holiday period by being when we're away from family and friends? So they give some great stuff on that site.
Oh, that's good. Thanks for offering that. I know we're sharing that on our social media channels as we speak. Would you recommend some of the online interactive? I'm not sure if there's any grief support rooms or some of the technology. I'm not real up to speed on that. Is there any there that you're familiar with? Would you encourage people to go down that road?
Well, I would encourage, primarily, I would encourage them. That's a good question, because I think a lot of people, especially with the way the pandemic has impacted all of us, we're all longing for connection. And especially when you're grieving, you're feeling even more so alone. And so having opportunity to connect with people who've also experienced a loss is very important. I would encourage anyone, for their first step, to talk to like a bereavement professional like myself, and kind of talking about your particular needs. I know that of some folks who really want to connect with people, and they've been part of a virtual group and have found that a little frustrating, because it's you're having to play with the technology. It's not face to face or in the same room with them. For some, they find it very helpful. And I know Facebook has groups for people who are grieving. I'm an optimist, and I want to believe that with vaccines coming out, that we're going to be able to have regular groups in the near future. And I would share with our listeners that as a bereavement coordinator, I'm aware of groups that are all over. Our particular office, Philadelphia, we cover a slew of counties. And some people don't want to drive 45 minutes to get to a grief support group, but we can find out where you live, and we can find a support group that's close to where you live, so you don't have to drive that far. And that's a wonderful way of connecting with people over your loss.
Yeah, that's it. Finding something local, and certainly the commute makes it easier, David.
Mm-hmm.
Well stated. One of our listeners, Shireen, offered that not to feel guilty about feeling relief when your loved one passes. I hadn't thought of that. I can imagine that for some primary caregivers, they may have been many months very intensively taking care of their loved one, or maybe even years for some of these neurological diagnoses. What would you offer someone who might be feeling relief but yet guilty?
Well, I guess I would first and foremost offer them that those feelings of relief and guilt, those are all part of your grief experience. Everyone grieves differently. We've said this over and over again over these broadcasts. And many people think that they kind of buttonhole grief to just feeling sad. And for a child, you ask a child, what does grief mean? They're going to say, that's when you're sad. But as adults, we see that that grief encompasses a lot more emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Grief, relief, anxiety, confusion. And I speak with a lot of folks who who have those feelings of relief, and we talk about how those feelings of relief and guilt are very much a part of their particular grief experience, and they're nothing to be ashamed of. They're nothing to walk away from, but they're there to process, to talk out with someone who's going to listen and allow you to share those feelings. Relief is part of many people's grief story, as they've sat with loved ones for days, weeks, months, who've been suffering, and then their loved one dies, and they feel that sense of relief, and then they feel guilty that they're feeling relief. All of that is part of the grief picture, and it's definitely worthwhile talking those feelings out and sharing them, and not thinking that they're wrong or they're taboo or they're not part of your grief, because they are.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing. I mean, if we talk about guilt, I know some of the folks I've been talking to recently who are in the holiday period now, and they're feeling a little happiness. They're feeling some joy, and they're feeling guilty that they're feeling those positive emotions over the holidays, and I think that's another thing to kind of remind us that for one thing, you can't be sad and you can't be actively grieving 24/7. You need times of comfort and joy, and that's what the season's about. And connecting with your loved one, and that then bringing some comfort and joy and even laughter. Talking about grandma's cookies or whatever, can be a great mix of grieving effectively over the holiday period.
Yeah, good point, David.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if, as people are friends or family members of someone who's maybe they have someone who's important in their life who's really struggling with grief, and they don't live near, but so they're on the phone or they're video chatting, would you encourage folks to say, I'd love to check in with you in a week or in a couple days? Is that kind of boundaries an encouraged way to try and stay engaged? But some people over communicate, some people under communicate. How would you recommend people find that right level of engagement with someone who's maybe really struggling with grief and loss?
Well, to the friend, I would offer them to just be their authentic self, and if they feel led to say to a friend, how about if I give you a call in a week? It's really on that friend to say yes or no. Because it's the griever who needs to set a boundary, or maybe that very thing could be what that person needs. Sadly, I find the opposite, though. I wish more people would be like that, Greg, where they would be more engaging and want to reach out to friends who are grieving just to check in on them. But I think most people, far most people, are a little bit more afraid of calling a griever, because they're afraid they're going to say the wrong thing, that maybe they'll say something that will inflate that person's grief, or and so that bit of discomfort may lead them to not even call. But I think calling and even saying, I don't know what to say to you right now. I'm here for you. I love you. And if you need a listening ear, I'm here. And then can I, how about if I call you in a couple weeks just to see how you're doing?
Yeah, that's a great recommendation. I have a teenage niece who I know has other friends who have lost loved ones. How might you encourage the teenagers, maybe a parent who's trying to, I know the teen years are hard enough to manage for some. How might you encourage a parent to help their teenager manage other friends or just a loss in kind of within that teenage realm?
How a teenager would then support a grieving friend?
Yeah, like other teenagers, there's so much going on in their lives and social media and peer pressure. And, I just know it's hard to be a teenager, and then you add grief to it. Oh, goodness.
It sure is. And, I love our teenagers. I've raised 5 of them on my own. And
oh, goodness.
I love the teen years, but sometimes kids can be not nice to one another. And I think the best thing that I have encouraged over the years as we've run grief support groups for teens is very similar to how we would encourage adults on how to support adults who are grieving, is just to be a listening ear, to love them, to be there with them, listen to music, to whatever, that's gonna meet your friend's needs where they're at. I think, I would want to encourage my teen to know that if a teenager has lost a loved one, they're going to feel very alone, and they're going to need some folks to reach out to them and check up on them. And even more so, it would be great if teens who have also lost a loved one would then connect with that one who has lost a loved one. That's going to make a world of difference in that teen's life, to know that they're not alone, that grieving can really suck, and it can really hurt, and it can be really painful, and it's okay. This is how it is right now, and letting that teen have an opportunity to express those thoughts in a safe way.
Yeah. Challenging for teenagers for sure.
Right.
One of the things I want to cover before we wrap this up, David, is I know sometimes there's a level of anger at just what happened, of the loss, and anger can, reveal itself in a few ways. I'm sure you have some experience with that. If someone's maybe feeling some of that, what would you offer, especially if it's really elevated during the holidays, that there's some anger they're dealing with? Is there anything you could offer there? Or?
I feel like I'm kind of being like I'm repeating myself, but I'm going to do that. That I think the best thing would be for that person to be able to share those feelings of anger with someone who's not going to judge them for feeling those feelings, allowing them to be in a safe place where they could say what they're angry about, what about their loved one or about the death that's brought the anger up. So I think having that safe place where they can talk about those deep and fueling emotions is important. As a bereavement coordinator, I would want to see if that's something that needs to be delved in a little deeper, and maybe refer them to a therapist or someone that's going to be able to spend more time with them. But also, I think it's a good thing to bring up is self-care again. That are they doing the things that I know for myself, when I'm having a day where I'm angry, it's very important that I get out and run. What are the things that you need to do to exercise self-care to make sure that you're comforting yourself in a healthy way, getting out your energy in a healthy way? So it might be exercising, it might be doing a craft, it might be reading, what have you, that's going to be able to kind of be able to express what's going on inside. But I think if someone is particularly struggling with anger and it's really seething, and they feel like they're not really moving much with that anger, I think they need to talk with their bereavement coordinator and see if they can get some extra support in their life.
Excellent.
Yeah.
That's a great tip, David.
Yeah.
I know that we had referenced the website, What's Your Grief. Did I leave out any details you wanted to share there? We're about at our time for this session. Thank you so much, David. I want to let you kind of summarize and close if there's anything from those tips, or if there's any closing comments you want to offer our listeners.
I just know that there are people who are going to be listening to this broadcast, and they're going to be feeling those pains and waves of grief in ways that, Greg, perhaps you and I have not really ever experienced ourselves.
Yeah.
Maybe they've lost a loved one that's meant so much to them, and now their world has been ripped apart. I spoke with someone recently who lost his wife, and he said, "I feel like my soul has been ripped out of me." And I would just want to encourage people to reach out. If no one's reaching out to you to support you in your grief, that you reach out to somebody where they're going to get you the support that you need. I always say the worst grief is grief that is left unaddressed. And the worst thing you want to do is stuff that grief. The worst thing you want to do is not share it with anybody. The best thing you can do is get yourself into a place where you're sharing what's going on inside of you and getting the help that you need. And we're here for you.
Excellent. Well stated, David. I want to thank David for your expertise, for sharing your stories. To our listeners who've engaged with us, thank you so much. Please follow us on Facebook and our YouTube channel. I know that these sessions will be hosted there. David, thank you again for offering some great advice. and happy holidays. I hope you are safe. I pray that our organization, Crossroads Hospice and Palliative Care, and as this pandemic hopefully gets in our rearview mirror, I think I'm very hopeful for everything. So again, thank you, David, for your time.
Thank you, Greg.
Have a great day.
Yeah, thank you. Take care.
Thank you, listeners.